Hello, I'm Patrick Cronin. I'm the Asia Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., and also a scholar in residence at the Carnegie Mellon University's Institute for Strategy and Technology in Pittsburgh. It is a great honor to join you at this important conference, and I apologize that I must do so only virtually. It's my loss, not yours. I've been asked to say some brief remarks to try to set in context the Trump administration's second term energy policy, and to do so with reference to the Indo-Pacific. So briefly, let me try to do that. President Donald Trump's second term energy policy is a direct continuation of his first term, one that prioritizes fossil fuel expansion, deregulation, and energy exports as key pillars of American economic and geopolitical power. From the moment he entered office in 2017, his administration moved aggressively to ramp up domestic energy production. Drilling on federal lands and offshore waters expanded. Environmental regulations were rolled back, and improved hydraulic fracturing, that is fracking technology, unlocked massive reserves of shale oil and natural gas. These efforts made the United States a net exporter of energy by 2019, something that hadn't happened since the end of the Truman administration in 1952. By the time President Biden took office in 2021, the United States had surged ahead of Saudi Arabia and Russia, producing over 12 million barrels of crude oil per day. Now, as he embarks on his second term, President Trump is doubling down. In one of his first executive orders this year, he established the National Energy Dominance Council, a move designed to harness America's vast fossil fuel resources for three key objectives: economic growth, technological competition, and geopolitical leverage. Let me underscore these 3 points. First, the economic advantage of energy dominance is straightforward. More supply means lower prices. As Secretary of Energy Chris Wright puts it, new supply will drive prices down, which will force innovation and set off a new energy price war, one that echoes the oil price battles of 2014. The Trump administration sees this as a way of quenching inflation, boosting trade, and strengthening the balance sheet. As trade advisor Peter Navarro recently noted on Fox News, $50 a barrel oil could be the key to maintaining America's global share of GDP. And Peter Navarro surely thinks trying to reduce America's trade imbalances is also critical, and energy could be one of the answers. Second, energy is about technology and the future of artificial intelligence, or AI. The U.S. must power the next generation of AI-driven data centers, massive hubs of computational power that will define economic and military dominance. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, will play a role, but advanced nuclear reactors, including small modular reactors, or SMRs, and microreactors, could soon become the backbone of AI infrastructure. If the United States leads in this sector, alongside key allies, it can secure dominance in both energy and technology. And thirdly, energy dominance is about geopolitical dominance. The Trump administration's vision of energy independence isn't just about securing domestic supply, it's about wielding global influence. By reducing reliance on foreign oil and renewables, the expanding fossil fuel exports, America strengthens its allies and weakens adversaries. The slogan, "Drill, baby, drill," is not just a domestic economic strategy, it's a geopolitical tool. When President Trump repeated it in his recent address to Congress, he wasn't just talking about energy. He was making it clear that great power decline is a choice. From his administration's perspective, ramping up fossil fuel production and perhaps advanced reactors is the surest way to make America great again. So let me try to briefly talk about the 5 key policy areas of the second Trump administration's energy policy. The first one is the fossil fuel expansion and the goal of energy independence. The Trump administration is wasting no time in expanding oil, gas, even coal production. Trump's first-term policies opened up vast new drilling areas, including Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and removed barriers that slowed fossil fuel development. On day one of his return to office this year, he declared a national energy emergency, reversing Biden-era Arctic protections, lifting coastal drilling limits, and ending the federal oil leasing moratorium. The goal seems clear: to ensure America's energy self-sufficiency while expanding global fossil fuel exports. President Trump argues that domestic production strengthens national security, reduces dependence on OPEC, and boosts American jobs and revenue. The second key policy area for the Trump administration's energy policy is about the reduction in priority of renewable energy and climate policy. This is a marked shift from the Biden administration, which focused on climate policy, even though it ended up downplaying it considerably in the latter half of the administration. President Trump, though, withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, again, cut subsidies for wind, solar, and electric vehicles, and halted offshore wind leases. He also revoked President Biden's ambitious EV adoption targets and is working to scale back tax credits for clean energy projects. And while states like California, Texas are going to continue to expand renewables, the federal government won't be spending more money, but rather less. It's going to be reducing its support for renewable energy. Now, critics are warning that this could cede clean energy leadership to China, which already dominates global supply chains for solar panels, batteries, and wind turbines. And even more importantly, it doesn't just cede leadership, it calls into question whether we're paying attention to the costs of accentuating a fossil fuel rejuvenation. That is, by neglecting renewables and climate change goals, we could be putting much more at risk than our wealth, than our technological lead, in our geopolitical clout. A third policy area is about deregulation. And this is really a calling card of the Trump second term to try to sweep in a deregulatory environment, one that will empower the private sector. His newly created National Energy Dominance Council is all about cutting red tape, speeding up project approvals, rolling back environmental restrictions. Some key measures include loosening methane emission regulations for oil and gas operations. Methane is one of the worst emitters, obviously the worst forms of greenhouse gas, but loosening methane emission regulations, it falls into cut the red tape, sweep in deregulation, and get the fossil fuels working even faster. Secondly, he's included weakening power plant emissions rules, removing the need for costly carbon capture. So when President Trump talks about clean coal, it really stretches credulity when he's now removing the need for even costly carbon capture technology on those coal plants. He's also calling for fast-tracking permits for drilling, for pipelines, refineries, including the revival of the Keystone XL pipeline. These are obviously can create environmental problems and challenges, as well as political challenges, as in the case of the Keystone XL pipeline, and yet it may be the least objectionable of these three tenets of deregulation. These moves are all meant, though, to benefit fossil fuel industries, and they will bring regulatory sort of measures into question about their value and their role, as companies are going to face constant shifts, though, in policy from administration to administration. So it's one thing for the Trump administration's second term to deregulate. What happens after the second Trump administration? Do we go back, as we did to Biden, with the new forms of regulation? So that kind of shifting around is also one of the issues that we can't address necessarily this year in Trump's second term, but it's likely to affect U.S. policy in a few years. Well, what about energy in the Indo-Pacific strategy, a fourth policy area? It seems to me that President Trump is turning energy into a diplomatic tool, if not weapon. His administration strengthening ties with Japan, South Korea, India through LNG exports and infrastructure. Japan has been encouraged to finance the U.S. gas projects, especially Alaska's North Slope. And South Korea may play a role in building LNG carriers. It's one of the great shipbuilding countries in the world. Last year completed its 500th LNG carrier vessel built in the last 30 years. Quite an achievement. In those LNG carriers mixed with Japan co-financing and partnered LNG development pipeline out of Alaska into Asia could create other opportunities throughout the Indo-Pacific region, but clearly is going to be a major priority of the Trump administration's policy. And at the same time, it will be countering China's influence. So by expanding U.S. supply chains in Asia, President Trump hopes to undercut China's influence to some extent. However, China is moving aggressively in another direction, investing heavily in renewables, financing green projects across Southeast Asia, as well as building up its own nuclear energy, its own fracking operations, still burning coal. So we'll have to see how much this helps with the competition. But clearly, the United States would be creating a long-term energy supply chain into Asia, which would be another form of presence and influence for decades to come. Now, one less obvious but critical piece of this strategy involves energy for AI-driven data centers. So Trump administration sees small modular reactors as a key technology to power potentially the next wave of AI competition. And this will open up new avenues for cooperation with other Indo-Pacific countries, including Japan, South Korea, India, and others, all of which are developing cutting-edge nuclear technologies. And then fifth and finally, in terms of a policy issue area, have to think about the impact of the Trump second administration's energy policy on the global market, as well as on climate diplomacy. President Trump's policies could reshape global energy markets, and indeed, they're intended to disrupt those global markets. By flooding the market with U.S. oil and gas, President Trump hopes to drive down prices, undercut OPEC, Russia, and maybe provoke a price war that leads to further innovation and the disruption that the United States hopes to take advantage of as it expands the exploitation of its own natural resources. At the same time, climate diplomacy is going to be taking a back seat during the Trump second administration. President Trump's withdrawn from the global climate initiatives. This is obviously creating anxiety in Europe, among other places. And we may see Europe and others respond with carbon border taxes on U.S. exports. And China, as I mentioned, may be looking to find new soft power advantage through climate leadership, even though it will remain the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So, wrapping this up, President Trump's second-term energy strategy is bold, it's aggressive, it's strategic as well. His administration believes that fossil fuel dominance, deregulation, and energy exports will restore American economic strength, will help support its technological competitiveness, and it will bolster its geopolitical power at a time when President Trump is looking at a great power competition through the prism of economic clout and energy dominance. However, this approach obviously carries risks. The U.S. could cede its leadership in clean energy. It may face some climate-driven trade disputes. It could destabilize global energy markets through aggressive oil and gas expansion. So at its core, the Trump administration's energy vision is about restoring America's place at the top, not just in energy, but in global economic influence, AI, great power competition. Whether this approach strengthens America's global standing or isolates it in an era of energy transition remains to be seen. one thing is clear: the United States is back in the business of energy dominance during this second Trump administration. Thank you so much for listening to me. Best wishes for the rest of the program. I look forward to catching all of the remarks when I can see the recordings. Thank you so much.
Well,